In a peaceful valley town, tucked between vast, undulating hills, where the morning fog often drifted lazily above the rooftops and the scent of pine lingered in the air, a young boy named Liam Hart first discovered the feeling that would shape his entire life. It started quietly, just a simple ride on an old hand-me-down bicycle that rattled over gravel roads and creaked on every climb. But for Liam, that bike wasn't just a machine. It was freedom, excitement, and possibility woven into metal and wheels. Each day after school, while other kids headed to the local field to play ball or lounged beneath the oak trees near the river, Liam slipped away toward the open countryside. He explored winding lanes, hidden trails, and steep, punishing hills that most adults avoided. With every ride, he pushed himself a little farther, testing the limits of his legs, lungs, and courage. He learned the shapes of the hills as intimately as others learned the streets of a city, where the wind changed direction, where the climbs kicked up to impossible angles, and where he could sprint all out, pretending he was racing toward a finish line painted on the horizon. Within the quiet rhythm of pedaling, something awakened inside him. The valley that once felt small suddenly became a training ground, a place where he could sculpt not just strength, but purpose. Some mornings, long before dawn brushed the sky with pale gold light, Liam would slip out of his house and ride under the stars, guided only by moonlit roads and the steady beat of his determination. As the seasons passed, his ambitions grew sharper and more defined. No longer was he content simply to ride. He wanted to test himself against the best in the world. He dreamed of roaring crowds, towering mountains from the legendary tours, and the electric tension of the starting line. In his imagination, he could already hear the announcers calling his name, see himself battling through wind and rain, and feel the weight of a champion's jersey resting proudly on his shoulders. What the other townspeople saw as a quiet valley, Liam saw as the first chapter of a much larger story, a place where a young cyclist with a fierce heart and unshakable dreams first began the journey that would one day take him far beyond the hills, into the world's greatest races, and into the pages of cycling history. Whispers began to circulate among the cyclists in nearby towns, quiet at first, spoken only by weathered riders at old cafes and mountain huts. They told stories of a mythical route hidden deep within the wildest part of the highlands, a route so dangerous and unforgiving that most believed it to be nothing more than a legend. Its name alone stirred both fear and fascination: the Serpent's Spine. According to the tales, the Serpent's Spine was not just a climb. It was a gauntlet carved directly into a chain of jagged, nearly vertical mountain passes. The path twisted like a living creature, coiling through narrow cliffside ledges, plunging into dark forest canyons, and rising again into wind-swept ridges where even birds struggled to fly. Storms gathered there without warning. Temperatures dropped in minutes. The air grew thin enough to make lungs burn and vision blur. Veteran cyclists described it as a place where nature tested not only strength and stamina, but courage, focus, and the will to continue when every instinct screamed to turn back. Many had tried sections of it, ambitious riders seeking glory, adventurers hungry for danger, but the mountain always won. Wheels slipped on shale, chains snapped under brutal gradients, exhaustion swallowed even the proudest athletes. But one detail made the legend truly haunting. No rider in recorded history had ever completed the Serpent's Spine in a single, continuous ride. Some claimed the route was cursed. Others insisted it was simply beyond human capability. Yet with each passing season, the stories grew, fueling the imagination of every young cyclist bold enough to dream of the impossible. And somewhere in that same landscape of myths and mountains, the idea of conquering the Serpent's Spine began to burn quietly in the heart of a determined rider. waiting for the moment when rumor would turn into destiny. When Liam finally announced his intention to conquer the serpent's spine, the entire valley seemed to freeze for a moment, then burst into laughter. Word spread quickly through the quiet streets, from the bakery where old men sipped coffee to the small market where neighbors gathered for gossip. To them, Liam was just a spirited young rider with big dreams, not someone destined to challenge a route that had defeated seasoned professionals and hardened adventurers.
Impossible, the townspeople scoffed openly. You'll break before the first climb. Even legends turn back. What makes you think you won't? Some spoke with concern, others with amusement, but most with the harsh certainty of people who had never dared to chase something bigger than themselves. Children mimicked the steep mountain angles with exaggerated gestures. Farmers shook their heads as if Liam were talking about flying to the moon. Even a few local cyclists, men who had once encouraged his progress, warned him not to be foolish. But their doubts didn't crush him. They fueled him. Inside Liam, something powerful shifted. An iron resolve, forged from every long morning ride, every quiet victory no one had seen, every dream he'd nurtured in silence. The more they mocked him, the more fiercely his determination grew. He began to train harder than ever, rising before dawn, climbing the harshest hills over and over until his lungs seared and his legs trembled. He studied maps of the spine, memorizing every contour, every dangerous ridge, every unforgiving ascent where one mistake meant disaster. He analyzed terrain gradients, weather records from previous years, and even wind patterns that shifted unpredictably across the mountain chain. His room became a war room. Walls covered in charts, hand-drawn elevation profiles, and scribbled notes about where he'd need to push, conserve, or brace for impact. He was no longer just training his body. He was sharpening his mind, preparing to outthink a route that had defeated every rider before him. In those quiet, lonely hours before sunrise, Liam was building something greater than endurance or strategy. He was building the unwavering belief that the spine could be conquered, and that he, despite every doubt cast upon him, was the one meant to do it. One chilly autumn evening, as Liam was finishing another grueling climb under the fading sunset, a figure appeared at the roadside, lean, weathered, and instantly recognizable. Marco Lenz, the legendary retired cyclist who had once been the pride of the valley, had returned to town after years spent drifting between coaching jobs and quiet mountain retreats. His name still echoed in old cycling circles, spoken with respect for his tactical brilliance and infamous toughness. Marco watched Liam descend the hill with a practiced eye, noting the precision of his movements, the steadiness of his breathing, and the fire burning behind his focus. By the time Liam reached the bottom, Marco was waiting for him with arms crossed and a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You ride like a man who's chasing something impossible," Marco said. Liam, startled and still panting, managed only a nod. Over the next few days, Marco observed from a distance, silently following some of Liam's pre-dawn climbs. He saw the discipline, the stubborn willpower, the refusal to quit even when the cold bit into his bones. Eventually, he approached Liam with an offer that felt like destiny. "If you're serious about the spine, you'll need more than strength. You'll need knowledge, the kind that only comes from someone who's been broken and rebuilt by the mountains." From that moment on, Marco became Liam's mentor. He walked Liam through advanced breathing techniques, how to draw air deep into the diaphragm on crushing climbs, how to stay calm when the heart felt like it was exploding, and how to recover faster than the competition. He taught him the art of cornering at high speeds, where the slightest misjudgment could mean disaster on the narrow ledges of the spine. He introduced pacing strategies used only by elite riders, when to conserve energy, when to surge, when to let the rhythm of the road dictate the effort instead of adrenaline. but the most crucial lessons were the ones no map or textbook could teach. He showed Liam how to master pain. "How you respond when everything hurts," Marco said during one brutal training session, "is what separates a good rider from an immortal one. Pain is not the enemy, fear of it is."
Together they trained through storms, through icy dawns, through nights where the moonlight turned the road into silver streaks. Marco pushed Liam harder than he had ever pushed himself, yet always with purpose, never cruelty, never recklessness. Under Marco's guidance, Liam didn't just grow stronger. He grew smarter, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. The town still doubted him, but Marco knew what he was seeing. He knew a rider on the brink of transformation. And for the first time, Liam began to feel he wasn't chasing an impossible dream. He was preparing to meet it. On the eve of his attempt, the tranquil valley turned unrecognizable. What began as a distant rumble deep in the mountains quickly grew into a violent storm that swallowed the night. Sheets of rain hammered rooftops until gutters overflowed like broken rivers. The winding roads Liam had trained on for years were now slick, flooded, and treacherous. Fierce winds howled through the streets, bending tree branches and rattling shutters as if warning the town of something catastrophic on the horizon. Lightning carved jagged streaks across the sky, illuminating the hills that loomed like dark giants around the valley. Even the bravest residents stayed indoors, peering anxiously through fogged windows. Conversations that night all led to a single conclusion. Liam would have to cancel. He'd be insane not to. Word spread quickly. Shopkeepers shook their heads. The old men at the cafe muttered that not even the strongest climbers in the world would dare to begin such a journey in weather like this. Parents whispered to their children that the spine itself seemed to be warning Liam away. Even Marco, though confident in Liam's strength, watched the storm with folded arms and a furrowed brow, silently torn between wisdom and belief. But Liam was unmoved. As the storm raged, he sat alone in his small room, his maps spread across the desk like battle plans. Candles flickered beside him, their flames dancing wildly in the draft sneaking through the windows. His bike stood ready in the corner, cleaned, tuned, every cable and bolt meticulously checked. Outside, the world was chaos. Inside, Liam felt only calm. Just before midnight, he stepped outside beneath the roaring storm. Rain saturated his clothes in seconds, and the wind whipped against his face like invisible lashes. Yet he stared into the darkness of the mountains with unwavering resolve. A flash of lightning illuminated him, soaked, shivering, but utterly fearless. "A myth isn't made in perfect weather," he whispered, barely louder than the storm itself. In that moment, he wasn't just a boy chasing a dream. He was a rider walking into legend, ready to face a test that only the storm was worthy of guarding. And while the valley trembled at the fury of the night, Liam mounted his bike, prepared to begin a journey no one believed could be done. Liam set off at the first fragile glow of dawn, when the sky was still bruised purple from the night's storm and the valley lay drenched in silence. The world felt washed clean, yet heavy with the smell of wet earth and pine. Mist clung to the foothills like ghostly curtains, hiding the monstrous climbs that awaited him. Only the soft crunch of gravel beneath his tires marked the beginning of his journey into the unknown. The first ascent rose before him like a wall. Liam had studied the elevation charts. He had traced every contour with his finger 100 times, but nothing, no map, no story, no whispered legend had prepared him for the reality of the spine's opening climb. It was longer, steeper, and more unforgiving than anything he had trained on. The road seemed to tilt upward endlessly, disappearing into the swirling fog. Each pedal stroke felt like lifting an anvil. Within minutes, his legs began to tremble. Within an hour, they burned like molten iron. The mountain showed no mercy. Cold wind sliced across his face, still carrying the storm's remnants. Water trickled down the cliffs, forming streams that rushed across the road, trying to push him back. His breath came out in ragged bursts, fogging the air in front of him. Sweat mixed with rain on his skin, turning everything numb. But Liam refused to stop. Every time the pain flared, sharp, biting, threatening to break his rhythm, he repeated Marco's words in his mind, like a mantra carved from steel. Pain is not the enemy, panic is. He let the ache wash over him without fear, accepting it as part of the climb, part of the price. He focused on steady breathing, smooth cadence, a calm mind. Each repetition of Marco's advice felt like a hand on his shoulder, guiding him upward. The higher he climbed, the thinner the air grew. Birds circled lazily above him, as if waiting to see whether he would continue or crumble. The mist thickened, swallowing the world until only the narrow strip of road ahead remained visible. But Liam pressed on, one pedal stroke, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. Doubt tried to whisper in the spaces between his breaths, but resolve drowned it out. He had trained for this, he had bled for this, and he would not allow the first climb to become the last. As he neared the summit, the fog briefly parted, revealing a sliver of golden sunrise breaking through the clouds, like a quiet acknowledgement from the mountain itself. Liam didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply kept riding. The spine had challenged him, and he had answered. The second mountain should have offered relief, a chance to recover after the brutal climb, but the spine had no intention of easing its grip. As Liam crested the summit, the world below looked like an ocean of shifting white. Thick fog spilled over the ridge like a living creature, crawling up the road and swallowing everything in its path. Within moments, he was descending straight into it. The temperature dropped sharply. Moisture clung to his skin, his clothes, his eyelashes. The road vanished beneath his wheels, replaced by a blinding sheet of gray. Visibility didn't just shrink, it collapsed. He could barely see his own handlebars. The air was unnervingly still, yet somewhere below he could hear the distant roar of wind funneled through the cliffs. On either side of the narrow descent lay drops so sheer they were spoken of in warnings, not in numbers, one in particular plummeting more than 300 meters straight down into a jagged ravine. Riders who attempted the spine said that the descent through this section felt like balancing on the edge of a blade. One wrong turn, one wobble, one misjudged corner, and it was over. Liam knew all of this. He also knew he couldn't stop, not here, not now, when momentum was the only thing keeping his legs alive. With the fog pressing against him like a suffocating blanket, he shifted his weight forward, narrowed his grip on the brakes, and let instinct take over. The training with Marco flooded back to him, not words this time, but sensation. Lean into the turn, don't fight it. Trust the center of gravity. Feel the road, don't look for it. He focused on the faint hum of his tires, the subtle vibration that told him when the gravel changed, when the slope dipped, when danger whispered beneath the wheels. His body became a sensor more refined than sight, hips adjusting, shoulders loosening, breath sinking with every curve. He felt the corners before he saw them. Sometimes the fog thinned just enough to reveal a shadow of the road's edge. An instant later, it swallowed everything again. His heart hammered, but his mind stayed sharp, controlled, unshaken. The world reduced itself to motion, sound, and instinct.
Halfway down, a gust of wind slammed into him from the left, threatening to push him toward the ravine. His bike skidded for a terrifying second, gravel spit out from under his tires, the void yawned beside him. But Liam didn't panic. He lowered his center of gravity, counter-steered instinctively, and corrected the slide with a smooth precision that would have made Marco proud. The bike stabilized, carving its way back onto the invisible path. His breath trembled, but he kept going. At last, after what felt like descending through a ghost world with death at his side, the fog began to thin. Rock faces emerged. A stretch of clear road appeared like a miracle. Liam exhaled, not in relief, but in focus. There were many mountains ahead, and the spine was only beginning to reveal its true nature. The descent was behind him, but the legend he was chasing still waited in the depths of the next valley. By the time Liam reached the halfway point of the spine, he was exhausted but steady, still in control, still fighting. The fog had lifted, the air had cleared, and for a brief moment he allowed himself to believe the worst of the route might be behind him. But the spine was not done. As he powered up a rugged slope scattered with sharp rocks and loose gravel, a sudden metallic crack tore through the still mountain air. Snap! His pedals jolted violently. The bike lurched forward without resistance. Liam nearly lost his balance. He looked down in disbelief. His chain, stressed by hours of brutal climbs, relentless torque, and the unforgiving terrain, lay slack and broken across the ground. For a moment the world seemed to pause. No cars, no voices, no help. Just the cold wind sweeping across the ridge and the distant echo of ravens circling overhead. A broken chain here meant disaster. It meant the end of the attempt. The spine had claimed countless riders for far less. Liam's breath trembled, and frustration surged through him like fire. He removed his gloves with shaking hands, his fingers stiff from cold and fatigue. Kneeling beside his bike, he inspected the damage, a cracked link, bent plates, the metal warped by sheer force. He could feel the precious daylight slipping away minute by minute. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the valley. Once darkness fell, navigating the spine would become almost impossible. But giving up was not an option. Marco's voice echoed in his mind, steady and unyielding. A rider isn't defined by the moments that go right. He's defined by the moments that break him, and what he does next. Liam dug into his repair kit with frantic urgency, his fingers trembling from cold and exhaustion, struggling to fit the master link into place. Twice it slipped from his grip. Once he dropped it and it nearly disappeared into the gravel. He cursed under his breath, then forced himself to inhale deeply, focusing his mind the way Marco taught him. Calm the breath, calm the hands, calm the fear. Piece by piece, he threaded the chain, adjusted the tension, aligned the plates. His fingertips burned, his knuckles bled, sweat dripped into the dust. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he snapped the link into place with a sharp, satisfying click. The chain was fixed. Not perfect, not new, but functional. He sat back, chest heaving, his heart pounding with a mix of relief and urgency. The sun had dipped lower. The temperature was falling. He had lost precious daylight, time he desperately needed for the most dangerous climb still ahead. But he was still in the fight. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, mounted the bike, and pushed off with renewed determination. Pain throbbed in his hands, his legs, his lungs, but his spirit remained unbroken. The spine had tried to stop him. It had thrown fog, storms, fear, and now mechanical failure. But Liam,
refused to surrender. The spine's next section was a nightmare known among veteran mountaineers as the Razor Ridge, a narrow path carved along a jagged spine of rock, barely wider than Liam's handlebars. On one side, a steep wall of stone rose into the clouds. On the other, an abyss plunged straight into a shadowy valley far below. No guardrails, no room for error, only courage and balance. As Liam reached the ridge, the weather turned violently against him. A brutal crosswind slammed into his body like the force of a hammer. The gust nearly ripped the handlebars from his grip. Gravel scattered across the narrow shelf. His bike wobbled dangerously. Then another gust came, and another, and another. It felt as if the wind itself had chosen him as an enemy. Liam lowered his body into an aerodynamic crouch, tightening every muscle to stabilize himself. But the wind wasn't just strong, it was unpredictable, striking him from alternating sides, twisting around the ridge like a furious serpent. Every pedal stroke became an act of raw strength, like forcing a boulder uphill while invisible hands pushed him backward. The air roared in his ears, the thin atmosphere stung his lungs, his eyes watered from the force of the gusts. Still, he fought. His thighs burned, shaking with exertion. His shoulder screamed from the constant tension. At times he felt the wheels skid, felt the terrifying pull of gravity threatening to drag him off the cliff's edge. But Liam kept going, inch by inch, breath by breath. The wind intensified, howling like a living creature. It battered him with full force, trying to break his will before the mountain did. It whipped his clothes violently, tore through his hair, and drowned out every other sound of the world. Most riders would have retreated. Most riders had. But Liam was beyond fear now. He lifted his head, opened his mouth, and screamed into the raging wind, not in terror, not in desperation, but with fierce, unshakable defiance. A roar from deep in his chest, a challenge to the mountain, a declaration that he would not be broken. The wind shoved back harder, as if offended by his audacity. Liam gritted his teeth, muscles trembling, and kept pedaling, slow, powerful, determined strokes. He no longer cared about speed or elegance. This was survival, powered by sheer will. For a moment, it felt like the whole world consisted of just two forces, the wind trying to stop him, and Liam refusing to let it. Step by step, meter by meter, he pushed across the ridge, defiant, unyielding, unstoppable. He wasn't just fighting the spine anymore. He was conquering it. After battling the merciless winds along the Razor Ridge, Liam reached the peak of the next mountain, a point known only in old trail notes as Dead Man's Drop. It was the most dangerous descent of the entire spine, a twisting, brutal plunge through switchbacks carved into crumbling rock, a path where even professional riders had crashed at full speed and never returned. The storm-wet roads glistened like black glass. The cliffs stood like jagged teeth waiting for a mistake. Liam took one steadying breath and began the descent. At first, everything seemed manageable. He feathered the brakes carefully, guiding his bike through tight corners. His tires hissed against the damp surface. The wind now funneled into the canyon, howled like a monstrous voice rising from below. Then he smelled it, burning metal. A few seconds later he felt it. His brakes were overheating. The long climb, the harsh grit from the storm, the constant braking on treacherous drops, everything had worn them down. Liam squeezed the levers again, and they offered resistance, but far too little. They were fading fast. A spike of adrenaline surged through him. The mountain didn't care. The descent didn't care. Gravity was pulling him downward faster and faster.
Another corner approached, a sharp, blind turn bordered by nothing but air. He clamped the brakes again. They hissed, they vibrated, they failed. Liam had no choice left. It was instinct or death. He shifted his entire body backward, almost sitting over the rear wheel to create maximum drag. He pressed his weight into the frame, leaned into the corners with terrifying precision, using physics instead of mechanics to control his speed. He skimmed the edge of the cliff more than once, close enough to feel the empty void tug at him. Every second stretched into eternity. Loose gravel skittered beneath his tires. The bike shuddered. His heart felt like it might burst from his chest. He angled his knees, dipped his shoulders, and let the bike glide, not fighting it, but working with the descent, reading every vibration through his bones. He was no longer riding. He was surviving. A final hairpin turn approached, a brutal one, the kind that sent riders straight over the edge if they hesitated. Liam leaned hard, trusting instinct, gravity, and every lesson Marco had drilled into him. The bike slid, caught, and launched out of the turn onto a straighter path. Moments later, the slope leveled out. Liam coasted to a shaky stop at the bottom, breath ragged, chest heaving. His hands trembled violently around the useless brake levers. Sweat and rain dripped from his chin, mixing with dust and fear. He looked back up at the monstrous descent he had just survived, a path of death that had claimed others, yet he had made it. Barely. He wasn't unhurt. He wasn't unshaken. He wasn't even sure how he was still upright. But he was alive. He wiped his face, inhaled deeply, and whispered to himself, "Not today." Then, despite the danger, despite the exhaustion, despite the fear still pounding in his veins, Liam got back on the bike and continued forward. Because the spine could break his brakes, but it would not break him. The final climb, known as the wall, rises before him like a sheer slab of stone, a slope so vicious that even elite riders are forced to dismount and crawl upward on foot. But Liam refuses that fate. He grips the handlebars with white-knuckled resolve and pedals into the ascent as if the mountain itself were daring him to quit. Every meter becomes a battle. His legs throb with molten pain, his lungs feel scraped raw, and his vision flickers at the edges like a dying flame. Sweat and dust streak down his face, his bike sways under the strain, and each push of the pedals feels like lifting the entire world on his back. Yet something deeper, stronger than muscle, stronger than fear, keeps him moving. His breath burns, his heart pounds like a war drum, but his spirit remains unbroken. On the wall, where legends are born and countless dreams have shattered, Liam refuses to surrender. As night settles over the mountains, the temperature plunges with merciless speed. The warm glow of daylight vanishes, replaced by a biting, metallic cold that gnaws at Liam's fingers and stiffens every muscle. His pace slows to a crawl. Each pedal stroke feels heavier than the last, as if the darkness itself is dragging him backward. Soon, the exhaustion becomes so deep, so absolute, that his mind begins to slip. Shadows twist into strange shapes on the road ahead. Tree branches become outstretched hands. Rocks seem to breathe. He knows he's hallucinating, but he can't stop it. His thoughts unravel, until a familiar voice cuts through the chaos. Marco, calm, steady, unwavering. Legends are born after the moment everyone else quits. The words echo inside Liam's mind like a lifeline, anchoring him to reality, reminding him why he began this impossible journey in the first place. In the icy darkness, clinging to Marco's voice, Liam pushes on. With only the pale glow of the moon lighting the shattered mountain road, Liam launches into the final kilometers with everything he has left. His muscles scream, his vision pulses in and out, and every breath feels like drawing fire into his lungs.
He is far beyond exhaustion, running purely on instinct, memory, and the echo of every dream he ever whispered to himself in the quiet valley. The world around him narrows to the sound of his wheels cutting through the cold night air. His spirit, though, refuses to bend. It becomes something fierce and unbreakable, driving him forward when his body should have failed long ago. And when he reaches the final marker, an old weather-beaten stone standing at the end of the impossible route, his strength finally gives out. Liam collapses beside it, not in defeat, but in triumph, the mountain winds carrying the truth of what he has done into the darkness. News spreads with astonishing speed, first through the valley, then across neighboring towns, and soon throughout the entire cycling world. Word travels like wildfire. Liam Hart has completed the impossible ride. The spine, long dismissed as a suicidal dream, has finally been conquered. The same people who once mocked his ambition now flood the streets in celebration, shouting his name with pride. Shop owners hang banners. Children try to imitate his riding stance. Elderly residents recount where they were the moment they heard the news, as if recalling a historic event. And from far beyond the valley, riders, journalists, and adventurers arrive in waves, eager to meet the young man who did what no professional, no champion, no legend ever could. Liam becomes more than a cyclist. He becomes a symbol of grit, hope, and the belief that some boundaries exist only until someone dares to cross them. Years later, long after the dust has settled on the spine's brutal ridges, cyclists around the world still speak the name Liam Hart with reverence. His story is retold in cafes, training camps, and mountain huts, passed down like a sacred tale from one generation of riders to the next. They recount how he defied storms that should have stopped any sane rider, how he pushed through gravity's fiercest pull, and how he rode straight into the heart of fear without ever looking back. His impossible ride transforms from a daring achievement into a living legend, a benchmark of human willpower. And every young rider who clips into their pedals at the foot of a difficult climb hears the same whisper in their mind. If Liam Hart could conquer the spine, then maybe, just maybe, the unthinkable is possible for them too.